Imagine being invited to your ex-husband's wedding. Not out of love, not out of respect, but because he secretly hopes you'll show up looking defeated. Now imagine walking in, not broken, not apologetic, but stronger than he ever expected, and in a car that stops every whisper cold. In the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Willow Creek, Pennsylvania, the air in late November carried a strange kind of stillness. The final leaves of autumn clung stubbornly to the branches, and the light had that soft, golden tint that made the world feel both nostalgic and a little tired. It was the kind of small American town where people still said hello at the grocery store, where neighbors waved from driveways, where children rode bikes in cul-de-sacs until the streetlights flickered on. For many, it was peaceful. For Emily Carter, it was the life she had rebuilt. She hadn't meant to create a quiet life. It had simply formed around her, piece by careful piece, in the years after her divorce from Mark Spencer. She was 42 now, her days balanced between raising her 9-year-old triplets and running a home care service she'd built from scratch. There were mornings of chaotic school lunches, afternoons of client meetings, evenings of homework and laundry. Nothing glamorous, nothing dramatic, but steady, predictable, safe. And Emily had learned that safety was a kind of luxury. The last person she expected to hear from on a cold Thursday afternoon was Mark. About 90 words in. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The envelope arrived alongside electric bills and grocery coupons, tucked neatly inside her worn-out mailbox. Thick ivory paper, handwritten calligraphy, formal, expensive. When Emily turned it over and saw Mark's name paired with a woman she had never met, her breath caught. Not with longing, not with grief, but with the sharp, metallic jolt of surprise. She stood frozen on her porch for a moment, the November breeze tugging lightly at her hair, as though urging her to step back inside, close the door, and pretend the envelope had never arrived. But curiosity was a persistent thing. Emily carried the mail to her small kitchen table, brushed aside crayons and homework sheets, and carefully opened the flap. Inside was a gold-embossed wedding invitation, and a handwritten note. It would mean a lot if you came. I think it's important for us to have closure. Closure. The word landed on her chest with a strange heaviness. Mark had never offered closure when she needed it most, when she was drowning in exhaustion with 3 newborns, when their marriage cracked under the weight of expectations, when he walked out with the practiced calm of someone who had rehearsed the speech in the mirror. The man who once left her without a backward glance was now requesting emotional neatness. Emily read the note 3 times. Not because she didn't understand it, but because she understood it too well. The polite phrasing, the measured tone, the subtext simmering underneath. Mark never did anything without an audience in mind. She placed the invitation on the table and took a long, slow breath. A decade had passed since their lives split into separate orbits. She had learned to keep her distance, to protect her peace, to build a world where his shadow didn't reach. And yet now, with nothing more than a single envelope, the past stood at her door again. Emily wasn't the woman she used to be. That was the thought that settled over her, warm and steady. She wasn't the overwhelmed, sleep-deprived, financially battered version of herself that Mark once dismissed as falling behind. She had rebuilt, relearned, regrown, in ways she doubted he could even imagine. Still, why now? And why her? The kitchen felt colder than a moment before. Outside, a few children shouted in the distance as they raced each other down the street. The normalcy of the sound contrasted sharply with the storm of questions forming in her mind. Emily slid the invitation aside, but it stayed in her periphery, like a presence refusing to be ignored. Whatever this was, it would not define her. Whatever game Mark was playing, she would not be the pawn. Yet deep inside, beneath layers of resilience she had spent years building, something stirred, something fragile, wary, but undeniably curious. Mark Spencer had always cared far more about appearances than he ever admitted. Not just the kind of appearances captured in mirrors, but the ones reflected back by other people. His sense of identity was sculpted from impressions, evaluations, subtle nods of admiration. Even in their early years of marriage, Emily had noticed the way he straightened his posture when walking past expensive restaurants, or how his voice shifted when speaking to someone he considered important. Mark liked being seen, and he liked being seen as successful. After the divorce, he leaned into that instinct with renewed intensity. He moved into a sleek townhouse in the new development on the north side of Willow Creek, granite countertops, floor-to-ceiling windows, community golf course access. He upgraded his car, his wardrobe, his circle of friends. He embraced a lifestyle full of weekend brunches, holiday parties, charity fundraisers, the kind of social ecosystem where everyone subtly compared everyone else. People in town watched the transformation with mild fascination. "He's really doing well," someone would say at the local diner. "He bounced back fast," another would add. No one said it aloud, but the implication hung in the air. Better than Emily. Mark's new fiancée, Julia Campbell, fit seamlessly into his curated world. She was polished, soft-spoken, philanthropic, raised in a family whose name appeared on the donor wall of the regional hospital. Julia wasn't unkind, just insulated. She had grown up with ease in her bones, privilege woven into her daily life. When Mark told her pieces of his past, he crafted the story carefully. He portrayed himself as the driven husband held back by a partner who lost motivation, as the ambitious man who wanted to aim higher while she settled, as someone who had tried valiantly until he simply couldn't anymore. Julia accepted his version. She didn't question it. Why would she? Mark liked that. What he liked even more was the approving nod he occasionally received when someone learned he was remarrying. Someone wealthier, more connected, more on his level. The narrative of his comeback needed an audience, and Willow Creek, with its fondness for gossip masked as concern, was the perfect stage. But in the weeks leading up to the wedding, Mark developed a fixation he didn't admit to anyone. Emily. More specifically, Emily seeing the wedding. He told his friends he wanted everyone there. He said he wanted a crowd, the kind where word would spread afterward. And when someone pressed him, half-jokingly, about why he cared so much whether Emily showed up, Mark waved it off with a smug smile. "It'll be good for her to see how far I've come." One of his friends raised a brow. "You sure that's a good idea?" Mark chuckled. "She'll be fine. She's always been practical. Besides, it might give her some closure." Closure. The same word he had written on the note. The same word he used to mask an undertone of triumph. But the truth was simpler and far less noble. Mark wanted validation. He wanted the symmetry of being watched by the woman he once left behind. He wanted the satisfaction of believing she would look at his new world and silently acknowledge that he had traded up. He imagined her arriving in the old sedan she used to drive, wearing a simple dress, overwhelmed by the crowd and the wealth. He imagined himself offering a gracious smile that said, "Without words, I hope you find happiness too." A smile that elevated him. A smile that proved he had won. What he did not imagine, what he could not fathom, was a version of Emily who had not only survived without him, but thrived far beyond his expectations. He didn't know about her business. He didn't know about her growing reputation or her new partnerships. He didn't know she was no longer the insecure woman he remembered. Mark crafted a fantasy where he remained the protagonist, and Emily remained stuck in the same chapter where he left her. And so, the invitation wasn't a gesture of goodwill. It was an invitation to a performance, one he expected Emily to watch from the audience. He had no idea the script was about to flip. In a town like Willow Creek, news didn't travel. It migrated, like geese in the fall, drifting through conversations, drifting across fences, across coffee shops, church steps, and grocery aisles. And Emily's name, tied to Mark Spencer's upcoming wedding, became one of those migrating stories within 48 hours. Emily steadied her breathing and kept walking, selecting a bag of salad greens as if her heart wasn't tightening in her chest. Later, at school pickup, one of the mothers, well-meaning but painfully tone-deaf, approached her with a sympathetic smile. "I heard you got invited to Mark's wedding. Are you okay?" Emily forced a small smile. "I'm fine, really." The woman reached out to squeeze her arm, the universal sign of unwanted small-town empathy. "Just remember, you don't have to prove anything to anyone." Emily nodded, but inside, she felt exposed, like her private life had been pinned to a bulletin board for everyone to analyze. That evening, after putting the kids to bed, she made tea and sat quietly in the dim light of her living room. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Not literally, but by the collective eyes of the town. People had already written a story about her in their heads. Emily, the struggling single mom, walking into her ex-husband's glamorous new life. She hated that story, mostly because it used to be true, and that, more than anything, planted a stubborn seed inside her. An instinct not rooted in revenge, but dignity. A desire to stand before the past and not flinch. Her sister, Rebecca, called that night. She lived 2 states away, but news had traveled to her as well. Likely through their mother, who had accidentally mentioned it during a recipe exchange. "So he invited you, huh?" Rebecca asked. "Apparently. You going?" "I haven't decided." Rebecca paused. "Do you want to go?" That was the question. The real question. Emily hadn't allowed herself to consider it honestly. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to stay as far away as possible." "And the other part?" Emily stared at the wedding invitation on the table. It gleamed under the lamplight, elegant and pretentious. "The other part," she whispered, "wants to walk in and walk out, without feeling anything." Rebecca's voice softened. "Then go, but only if you can carry yourself, not your past." Emily closed her eyes, letting the words sink in. She didn't want to be defined by what Mark had done. She didn't want whispers to shape her choices. She didn't want fear to make decisions on her behalf. Whether she went or not, one thing was clear. She would not be small for anyone, not even for the man who once made her believe she was. Long before the invitation, long before the quiet kitchen and the stable job and the controlled breathing, there had been another version of Emily, one full of hope, dreams, and naive certainty. She met Mark when they were both 24. He was charismatic, ambitious, with that easy kind of confidence that made people feel safe around him. Emily was drawn to his certainty, his ability to map out his future, his drive to accomplish something meaningful. He made her feel like she belonged in his plan. They married within a year, in a modest ceremony behind her parents' house. Back then, life felt like a blank canvas waiting for color. Their early marriage was simple, almost charmingly unstable. Shared bills, cheap furniture, second-hand appliances that groaned when used. Emily worked as a part-time nurse's aide. Mark was climbing the ladder at a local real estate firm. They laughed often, fought occasionally, and dreamed endlessly. But dreams shifted the day Emily learned she was pregnant, with triplets. She remembered sitting on the exam table, clutching the ultrasound photos, laughing and crying at once. Mark tried to smile, but there was something tight around the edges of his mouth. He hugged her, told her they'd figure it out, but she had sensed a tremor beneath the reassurance. The pregnancy was difficult. Emily was sick for months, swollen, exhausted, unable to work. Mark took on extra hours, but the stress etched itself into his voice, his posture, the way he stared at bills a little too long. When the babies arrived, 3 tiny, fragile miracles, Emily felt her entire life tilt into a different orbit. Nights blurred into days, feedings into diaper changes. Her world shrank to the size of a nursery. Mark's world did not. He returned to work quickly, framing it as a necessity. But as months passed, a new tone crept into his words. resentment, frustration, a belief that Emily was no longer the woman he married. "You're always tired," he said once, not unkindly but unthinkingly. "I'm raising 3 infants," she said. "I know, but you don't seem like yourself anymore." "Myself," Emily repeated, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "I don't even have time to shower. It's just, I thought we'd be building our life together. I didn't think everything would stall. The word cut deeper than he meant. Another night, during a rare moment when all 3 babies slept at once, Mark sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his temples. "I can't keep doing this," he said quietly. Emily's chest tightened. "Doing what?" "Feeling like I'm the only one trying." She stared at him, stunned. "Mark, I haven't slept in 2 days." "I know, but that's just it. There's no plan, no ambition anymore. You're overwhelmed all the time." She wanted to scream. She wanted to disappear. She wanted him to understand that she was drowning, not by choice, but because she was holding their family above water. But he didn't. The breaking point came one afternoon when Emily, still wearing spit-up-stained pajamas at 3 p.m., overheard Mark on the phone telling a coworker, "I can't build the future I want with someone who's stuck." Stuck, as if she were a weight around his ankle, as if raising their children was a personal failure. He didn't know she was standing in the hallway, holding a basket of laundry, tears burning down her cheeks. The memory of that moment lived in her like a scar, healed, but always there. Within a year, the marriage ended. Mark left quietly, cleanly, with a speech that sounded rehearsed. "We've grown apart. We want different things. I need more." He didn't look back when he walked out the door. Emily had never forgotten that door closing. Not because she wanted him back, but because it marked the day she realized she had no choice but to rebuild from nothing. Rebuilding was never dramatic. There was no montage, no triumphant music, no sudden stroke of luck. Emily's new life took shape the way winter becomes spring. So slowly you don't realize it's happening until one day you look around and notice the world has changed. The early years after the divorce were a blur of survival. She lived paycheck to paycheck, stretching grocery budgets, clipping coupons, accepting help she once would have been embarrassed to take. She worked nights as a caregiver for elderly clients, then woke up before dawn to feed the babies. Sometimes the exhaustion made her vision blur. Sometimes she fell asleep in a chair while burping one of the boys. But she endured because there was no alternative. When the triplets turned 3, something shifted. They were still lively, chaotic, and full of questions, but Emily finally had small pockets of mental space. Cracks of daylight where she could breathe, think, imagine. And in those cracks, she realized something important. She was good at caregiving. Not good as in this is all you're capable of, the way Mark had implied, but good in the sense that she understood people. She understood fear, frailty, vulnerability. She could calm an anxious dementia patient, reassure a grieving spouse, manage medications with precision. These were skills, valuable ones. That realization led to another. The town had a growing elderly population. Families struggled to find reliable in-home care. Demand far outpaced supply. Emily began to imagine a business. Not a big one, not at first. Just herself and maybe 1 or 2 part-time employees. She scribbled ideas on the back of grocery receipts. She researched state regulations late into the night. She called agencies in neighboring towns to ask questions under the guise of considering applying for a job. It took her 6 months to gather the courage. Another 6 to save enough money to file paperwork and buy basic equipment. Her first client was a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Dane. Her second was a veteran with mobility issues. Her third came through a referral because Emily had a calmness about her. Calmness. She didn't feel calm most days, but hearing the word gave her strength. Her small agency grew from 2 clients to 10, then 20. She hired another caregiver, then another. At first, she micromanaged everything: schedules, medications, transportation, but eventually she learned to delegate. Emily discovered she had natural leadership instincts, the kind that didn't bark orders but earned trust. There were failures too. A scheduling mix-up that resulted in a frantic phone call. A a staff member who quit without notice, a client's family who demanded too much. Nights Emily sat on the floor of her bedroom, overwhelmed by the responsibility of running a business while raising 3 children alone. But she kept going. The pivotal moment came when a regional medical group approached her about partnering for post-hospital care services. The meeting took place in their sleek office building. Glass walls, polished floors, and Emily arrived in a modest blazer, hands slightly trembling. She expected them to dismiss her as too small, too new, too informal. Instead, they admired her model, her reputation, her growing list of satisfied clients. "We want to work with people who understand community needs," the director told her. "And you clearly do." Emily left the meeting stunned. Not triumphant, not boastful, just quietly proud. The partnership changed everything. It stabilized her income, expanded her staff, allowed her to buy a reliable car, a deep blue SUV with enough room for the kids' soccer gear and her work supplies. It also introduced her to business contacts who treated her as a peer, not a charity case. Emily didn't become wealthy. She became steady, independent, respected. When she looked in the mirror now, she saw someone Mark would not recognize. Someone she sometimes barely recognized herself. And that, she realized, was exactly the point. The wedding invitation remained on her kitchen table for days, then weeks. It moved from the table to the countertop, then to the little corkboard by the fridge, as if it were waiting for her to make a choice. Sometimes Emily walked past it without looking. Other times she paused, feeling the pull of it like a weight in her chest. It wasn't fear holding her back. Not anymore. It was the memory of who she used to be. One evening, after a long day of client visits, she sat on the couch with a cup of tea, legs tucked under a blanket. The house was quiet except for the hum of the dishwasher. She stared at the invitation on the coffee table and asked herself the one question she had been avoiding. What scares you more, going to the wedding or letting the past still control you? She didn't have an answer. The triplets were sprawled on the living room rug drawing pictures. Their laughter floated through the room like tiny threads weaving her back to the present. "Mom," one of the boys said, "is Dad's wedding like a big party?" Emily hesitated. "I think so, honey. Are you going?" "I haven't decided yet." "Why?" Kids had a way of slicing straight to the truth. She opened her mouth, closed it, reopened it. Because sometimes grown-ups have feelings that are complicated. One of the kids frowned thoughtfully. "Are you scared?" Emily blinked. "No, not scared." Then, more honestly, maybe a little unsure, her daughter crawled onto the couch beside her. "You always tell us we should be brave." The words landed softly but deeply. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Emily sorted through paperwork for her business. Among the papers was a thank you letter from the daughter of a former client. Elegant cursive, heartfelt words about compassion, professionalism, dignity. Emily traced the handwriting and felt something shift inside her. She wasn't the fragile woman Mark remembered. She wasn't the overwhelmed wife he left behind. She wasn't stuck anymore, not even close. 2 days later, she visited one of her oldest clients, Mr. Lawson, a retired carpenter with arthritis and a sharp wit. As she helped him settle into his recliner, he studied her face with perceptive eyes. "You look troubled," he said. She smiled faintly. "Just thinking about something." "Thinking is overrated," he grumbled. "Life's shorter than we pretend." Emily laughed. "You always say that." "Because it's true." He pointed a bent finger at her. "Whatever it is you're avoiding, don't. Life only moves forward." When she drove home that afternoon, she knew the decision had been made. Not out of pride, not out of spite, not even out of curiosity. She would go because she had finally outgrown the version of herself that once feared being judged. Because closure wasn't something someone handed you, it was something you claimed. That evening she circled the date on her calendar. She didn't feel dread. She didn't feel excitement. She felt something close to clarity. It was time to step into a room she once feared and walk out with her head high. The morning of the wedding dawned softer than Emily expected. A quiet, pale sunlight slipped between the blinds, landing on the hardwood floor like a gentle invitation to start the day. For a moment, she lay still in bed, listening to the old house settling, the muffled giggles of the kids down the hall, the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower. Nothing about the world suggested confrontation. Nothing hinted at the emotional landmine she was about to walk into. She made breakfast as she always did: scrambled eggs, toast, orange slices. The kids chattered excitedly about absolutely nothing important. A school project, a funny commercial, a cartoon they wanted to watch later. Their innocence grounded her. After breakfast, Emily showered and stood in front of her closet. She didn't want to dress like she was going to impress anyone, nor did she want to look like she had made no effort. She chose a deep navy dress, simple, fitted at the waist, modest but elegant. The kind of dress that said, "I'm here and I'm fine." She twisted her hair into a loose low bun. Her makeup was subtle. Soft foundation, a hint of blush, neutral lipstick. Enough to look polished but not performative. The kids, meanwhile, created chaos. Her daughter insisted on wearing a sparkly headband. One son couldn't find his shoes. The other kept announcing, "We're going to Daddy's wedding," as though it were a parade. Emily laughed under her breath. "We're attending, not hosting," she reminded them gently. Then, right on time, there was a knock at the door. Emily expected a delivery, or a neighbor. What she did not expect was a uniformed chauffeur standing on her porch. "Good morning, Miss Carter," he said, tipping his hat politely. "I'm here to take you to the event." Emily blinked. "To the wedding?" "Yes, ma'am." Behind him, parked along the curb, was a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom, polished to a mirror shine. Its chrome accents glimmered against the morning sun. She stared, stunned. "There must be a mistake. I didn't order anything." "No mistake," the driver assured her. "I was told this was a courtesy ride from your business partner, Mr. Hamilton." Her breath caught. Mr. Hamilton, the director of the medical group she had partnered with months ago. He was a man of few words, but he respected her deeply and saw potential in her work. He must have heard she had a big day coming up and offered this without understanding the context. Of course, he didn't know the emotional strings intertwined with this event. "Ma'am," the driver said softly, noticing her hesitation. "I can wait if you need a moment." Emily shook her head. "No, it's fine." The kids gasped with unfiltered excitement. Mom, are we riding in that?" Emily nodded slowly. "I guess we are." As the driver loaded the kids' jackets and small backpacks into the trunk, Emily felt something shift, an internal alignment she hadn't anticipated. She hadn't asked for this display. She hadn't planned to make an entrance. But life had handed her something unexpected. Not wealth, not showmanship, but dignity. She wasn't borrowing glamour. She was stepping into the life she had earned. When she slid into the soft leather back seat, her hands trembled, not with fear, but with an unfamiliar sense of presence. She felt solid, rooted, a woman at peace walking toward a past that no longer defined her. The car pulled away from the curb. Willow Creek drifted by. The grocery store, the school, the park bench where she once cried after a particularly hard week. And slowly, mile by mile, the past felt less like a shadow and more like a memory. She wasn't going to the wedding as Mark's ex-wife. She was going as Emily Carter, mother, business owner, survivor, whole. And she had no idea how profoundly that would unsettle everyone waiting at the venue. The wedding venue was a renovated barn at the edge of Willow Creek, rustic yet upscale, with wide wooden beams, string lights draped from the rafters, and manicured fields stretching toward the horizon. It was the kind of place that married Pinterest charm with a high price tag. Mark would have loved that combination. The Rolls-Royce turned onto the gravel driveway, rumbling softly over the stones. Outside, guests mingled near the entrance. Men in tailored suits, women in pastel dresses, small clusters of conversation drifting in the crisp air. The moment the Rolls-Royce appeared, conversations faltered. People turned. Eyes widened. The car rolled to a gentle stop near the entrance. For a beat, no one moved. Then the driver stepped out and walked toward the passenger door. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. The crowd unconsciously leaned in. When Emily stepped out, the air shifted. Not dramatically. Not like in a movie where music swells, but subtly, like the quiet intake of breath before a storm. She emerged carefully, gracefully, smoothing the skirt of her dress. Then she turned to help her children climb out. Their bright faces and tidy outfits added an unexpected warmth to the scene. A few whispers floated on the breeze. "Is that Emily? She looks incredible. Is that a Rolls-Royce? Where did she get that?" No way Mark saw this coming. Emily kept her posture relaxed, chin steady, eyes soft. She didn't hurry. She didn't search for anyone's gaze. She simply existed in the space without apology. The confidence wasn't loud. It was lived in, the kind of confidence that grows slowly, shaped by years of hardship and quiet victories. Across the courtyard, several guests nudged each other. Emily recognized faces she hadn't seen in years. Neighbors, distant acquaintances, former co-workers. Most of them had formed opinions about her long before today, and now those opinions were being silently rewritten. As she approached the entrance, the venue staff opened the door for her. Inside, the warm glow of string lights illuminated the rustic interior. The music softened. A hush spread through the room like a ripple in still water. Emily felt every pair of eyes on her. But instead of shrinking, she simply breathed. Her children tugged gently at her hands, grounding her. "Mom," her daughter whispered. "People are staring." Emily smiled gently. "That's okay. Sometimes people stare when they don't expect something." The driver offered a soft nod before leaving, as though acknowledging the gravity of the moment. Not knowing its true context, yet sensing its emotional weight. As Emily walked further in, she saw people whisper behind their hands. Not in cruelty, but in shock. Genuine, stunned disbelief. It wasn't the car. It wasn't the dress. It was the woman. She looked whole. She looked centered. She looked nothing like the version of Emily they had imagined showing up today. She looked free. At the far end of the hall, someone else noticed her arrival and froze. Mark. He had been laughing with one of his groomsmen, drink in hand. But when he turned toward the entrance and saw Emily, the smile fell off his face like a mask slipping. His eyes widened. His posture stiffened. He swallowed hard. This was not the Emily he remembered. This was not the narrative he had crafted. This was not the moment of quiet superiority he had envisioned. Emily felt his gaze, but she didn't flinch. She didn't speed up. She didn't slow down. She simply kept walking. And in that moment, surrounded by string lights and gasps and stunned silence, the balance of the room shifted. Not toward her, but away from him. Emily had barely stepped 3 feet into the venue before a familiar voice called her name. Emily? Emily Carter. It belonged to Miranda Holt, one of Mark's distant cousins. An overly enthusiastic woman with a talent for turning every conversation into a performance. She walked toward Emily with her arms spread wide as if greeting a long-lost relative. "Oh my goodness, it really is you," Miranda exclaimed, eyes sweeping over Emily's dress, her hair, and the children standing quietly beside her. "You look well. Really well." Emily smiled politely. "It's good to see you too, Miranda." Miranda lowered her voice, leaning closer. "I have to be honest. I didn't think you'd come. Must have taken a lot of courage." There it was, the first subtle sting of the evening. Emily didn't react. "It's an important day for Mark. I wanted to be respectful." Miranda patted her arm in a way that felt more patronizing than supportive. "You always were gracious. Good for you. Good for you." A phrase that held just enough friendliness to mask the condescension beneath it. Before Emily could respond, someone else approached. A former co-worker of Mark's, a man named Daniel who had always spoken to Emily as though she were a child. Well, Emily," he boomed. "You look fantastic. Didn't expect such an entrance." His gaze flicked toward the door where the Rolls-Royce had disappeared. "Quite the ride you came in. Did you win the lottery?" Emily replied calmly, Just a gift from a business partner. Daniel raised his eyebrows. Business partner? That's impressive. I didn't know you were doing all that. I've been running a home care agency for several years now. Oh, he said, as though genuinely surprised. Good for you. There it was again. Emily kept her composure. She had spent too many years allowing comments like these to destabilize her. Not today. As Daniel wandered off, a group of women at a nearby cocktail table whispered behind wine glasses, casting quick glances in her direction. Emily caught fragments of their murmurs. Didn't expect her to look so. Thought she was struggling. Mark's not going to like this. The words didn't sting the way they once would have. Instead, they felt distant, like echoes from another life. Still, the evening had only just begun. Moments later, she came face to face with Julia. The bride-to-be was stunning in a simple ivory robe, her dark hair pinned in soft waves, her face glowing with the kind of nervous happiness reserved for women on the edge of a new chapter. She approached Emily with genuine politeness, even warmth. "Emily," she said softly, "I'm really glad you came." "Thank you," Emily replied, meeting her eyes. "I hope this isn't too uncomfortable," Julia admitted. "I didn't know Mark had invited you until recently, but I thought it was kind of him." Emily said nothing for a moment. Not because she was angry, because she saw something in Julia's face. Innocence. Naivety. A woman who believed the best in people. "It's your special day," Emily said softly. "I'm here to wish you well." Julia looked relieved. "That means a lot. Honestly." Their conversation was brief, but it shifted something. Julia didn't look at Emily the way others did, with pity or judgment or curiosity. She looked at her with sincerity. And yet, hovering behind Julia was Mark. He approached with an awkward mix of forced confidence and undeniable tension. His smile didn't touch his eyes. "Emily," he said, voice a little too bright. "You made it." "Yes," she replied simply. He glanced toward the entrance again, clearly still rattled by her arrival. "Nice car," he added casually. "It's just transportation," Emily said. "Nothing more." Mark waited for an explanation, one that would make him feel superior again. But she didn't offer any. The silence left him visibly unsettled. Julia excused herself to greet another guest, leaving the two of them alone. Mark shoved his hands into his pockets, searching for words. "You look different," he said. "I've changed. I can see that." Silence stretched between them. Not the comfortable kind that once existed in their early marriage, but a heavy, unfamiliar silence. Emily didn't ask how he was doing. She didn't comment on the venue. She didn't give him the validation he expected. And it disarmed him. He cleared his throat. "I'm glad you came. Really. It shows we're both mature enough to move on." Emily nodded once. "Yes, we've both moved on." But something in Mark's face said he wasn't ready for what that actually meant. The cocktail hour buzzed with soft jazz, clinking glasses, and the low hum of small talk. Emily found a corner near a decorative barrel table where she could watch her kids color in their activity books. She was content to stay out of the center of the room. But life has a curious way of pulling the truth into the open, especially when alcohol loosens tongues. It happened near the bar. One of Mark's groomsmen, Todd, was already a few drinks in. A tall man with flushed cheeks and a tendency to speak too loudly. Todd spotted Emily and waved enthusiastically. "Emily," he called out, weaving slightly as he approached. "Wow, it's been ages." Emily offered a polite smile. "Hi, Todd." He leaned against the table as though the room were tilting beneath him. "Didn't expect to see you here. I mean, Mark said you probably would. But honestly, I thought no way." Emily waited, sensing danger in his rambling tone. Todd lowered his voice, though not nearly enough. "He said inviting you would be... What was the word?" He snapped his fingers. "Oh, symbolic. Like closure. But also like, good for you. Good for you. The third time tonight." But Todd wasn't finished. "He said it'd be great for you to see how well things turned out for him." Todd laughed, nearly spilling his drink. "Said you'd be impressed." Emily's stomach tightened. Not with shame, but with clarity. This was the truth behind the invitation. Todd kept going, unaware he'd stepped onto a landmine. He even joked, well, maybe not joked, that it would help you move on, since you'd see what real success looks like now. Todd shrugged. His words, not mine. The air around them stilled. Not just for Emily, for everyone within earshot, because several people had heard him, including Julia, who had just stepped out from behind a pillar, having approached quietly to ask the bartender for water. Her face slowly drained of color. "Todd," she said sharply. "What did you just say?" Todd blinked at her, confused. "Julia, hey, I was just telling Emily what Mark said about..." "About what?" she asked, her voice trembling. Todd looked between the two women, suddenly aware he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Maybe I should, but it was too late. The damage was done. The lie Mark had told Julia, the insult he had intended for Emily, the ego behind the invitation, all of it lay exposed on the floor between them. Emily felt a familiar ache, the echo of an old wound, but it didn't crush her the way it once might have. Instead, she felt strangely steady. Julia turned to Emily, eyes filled with apology she didn't yet know how to voice. "I'm so sorry," Julia whispered. I didn't know he said those things." Emily shook her head gently. "It's not your fault." Before they could say more, Mark hurried across the room, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. His face was tight with tension. "What's going on?" he asked, eyes narrowed. "Todd," Julia said, her voice breaking, "just told us what you said about inviting Emily." Mark's face blanched. "Julia, that's not accurate. He's drunk." But Todd, oblivious to nuance, added, "Dude, you literally said it last week. You said she'd finally see the difference." "Todd," Mark snapped, panic creeping into his voice. But it was too late. Guests around them pretended not to listen, but their stiff postures and darting eyes betrayed them. Emily looked at Mark, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with complete and utter understanding. This was who he had always been, and she was done letting him define her. Mark opened his mouth, but no explanation he could offer would change what had been revealed. Emily didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She didn't lash out. She simply said, in a voice steady enough to quiet the room, "I didn't come here to compete, Mark. I came because I thought you wanted peace. But I see now, this wasn't about peace." For a moment, Mark looked small, smaller than he had ever seemed in her memories. And that was the moment Emily truly, finally, felt free. For a few long seconds, no one moved. The jazz music continued playing in the background, but it felt strangely disconnected, like it belonged to a different evening entirely. Conversations across the room quieted to a hush as eyes subtly tracked the trio standing near the bar. Emily, Julia, and Mark. Mark looked between them, his jaw tight, sweat forming at his hairline. "Julia," he said, lowering his voice, "you're misunderstanding." "I'm misunderstanding?" she asked, incredulous. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to slice through the tension. "Todd said you told him inviting Emily was, what? A way for her to see what real success looks like." Mark shot a furious glance at his groomsman. "He's drunk. He's twisting my words." But Todd wasn't the issue anymore. This was about integrity, and everyone in the room could sense it. Emily watched the scene unfold with an eerie calm. For years, she had imagined what she would say to Mark if she ever found the courage. She had rehearsed lines in the quiet of her car, whispered comebacks during difficult nights, prepared speeches for an audience that didn't exist. But now, standing before him, she didn't feel anger. She felt clarity. "Mark," she said quietly, "did you or did you not say those things?" His face reddened. "Emily, look, it was a joke, a stupid moment. I didn't mean anything by it." She held his gaze unblinking. "You meant enough to say it." Around them, the room remained still. A few guests looked away, uncomfortable. Others watched with a kind of morbid curiosity. But Julia, poor Julia, looked like the ground had shifted beneath her. "You lied to me," she whispered to Mark. "You told me you invited her because you respected her, because you wanted a healthy start to our marriage." Mark reached for her hand, but she drew it back as though his touch burned. "I didn't lie," he insisted. "I just embellished." Emily almost laughed. Not cruelly, but softly, the kind of sad, disbelieving laugh that comes from recognizing a pattern you once lived inside. "That's what you always called it," she murmured. "Embellishing." Mark's mouth tightened. "Emily, this is not the time." "But you made it the time," she said gently. She wasn't raising her voice. She didn't need to. The honesty in her tone carried more weight than shouting ever could. For the first time since arriving, Emily stepped closer to him. Not confrontationally, but with the quiet steadiness of someone who had outgrown the need for validation. "I didn't come here to see how well you're doing," she said. "I didn't come here to compare lives. I came because I believed you wanted closure. I thought, maybe we could both walk away with peace." A flicker of something, regret, perhaps, crossed Mark's face. Emily continued, "But this wasn't about peace for you. It was about pride." Mark opened his mouth, but no words came out. "You didn't move up, Mark," she said softly. "You just moved on, and so did I." The sentence fell between them like a stone dropped into water. Clean, simple, final. Julia's eyes welled, but she blinked the tears back. "Emily, I really didn't know." Emily offered her a small, sympathetic smile. "None of this is your fault. You're not responsible for his insecurities." Julia pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, as if holding back a sob. Emily turned to leave, but paused when Mark spoke, voice low and uneven. "Emily, was I really that bad to you?" She turned slightly, meeting his gaze once more. "You weren't always," she said honestly. "But when I needed a partner most, you needed an audience." Mark's shoulders sagged. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him, not physically but emotionally, like a man suddenly realizing he had spent years chasing validation instead of connection. Emily didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt complete. She gave him one last nod, a gesture of release, not forgiveness, and walked toward her children. The chapter she had feared revisiting had finally closed itself, and she hadn't needed him to close it. She had done it herself. Emily gathered her children, their small hands slipping naturally into hers. They looked up at her with trusting eyes, completely unaware of the emotional earthquake that had just taken place. "Are we leaving now?" her daughter asked. "Yes, sweetheart," Emily said, voice steady. They stepped out of the venue and into the cool evening air. The sky was painted in soft oranges and purples, the last light of day stretching across the horizon like a gentle farewell. A breeze carried the faint scent of pine and autumn leaves. The Rolls-Royce was waiting at the end of the gravel path. Not as a symbol of triumph, just a quiet ride home. As they approached, Emily felt dozens of eyes from inside the venue following her. Some were sympathetic, some curious, some deeply stunned. But none of them mattered. For the first time in a very long time, she wasn't performing for anyone's expectations. Not even her own. The driver opened the door. "Ready to head back, Miss Carter?" "Yes," she said simply. Her children scrambled in first, laughing about something silly. Emily settled into the leather seat, letting out a long, slow breath. Not a sigh of exhaustion. Not relief. Something deeper. Something like release. As the car pulled away, she glanced back at the venue shrinking in the distance. The warm lights glowing behind the barn doors, the silhouettes moving inside, the chapter closing behind her. Inside those walls, she had confronted a ghost she didn't even realize was still haunting her. And it hadn't defeated her. It hadn't even shaken her. It had freed her. Her reflection in the window looked different somehow. Not younger, not older, just lighter. She thought back to the years she spent doubting herself, questioning her worth, wondering if she was enough, blaming herself for a marriage that had been doomed by mismatched values. She remembered the nights she cried quietly so the children wouldn't hear, The mornings she forced herself out of bed to face another day of uncertainty. The moments she wondered if she would ever feel whole again. Yet here she was, whole, steady, unburdened. Her son leaned over and rested his head on her arm. "Mom," he whispered sleepily. "You're smiling." "I guess I am," she murmured. "Why?" She looked out the window again, watching the world blur past. The soft glow of streetlights, the familiar houses, the roads she had driven 1,000 times. "Because," she said softly, "I think we're finally moving forward." The car turned onto her street, the warm glow of her modest home coming into view. It wasn't grand, it wasn't impressive, but it was hers, built with effort, sacrifice, patience, and love. A home forged from resilience, not reputation. She tucked the kids into bed one by one, kissing their foreheads, listening to their quiet breathing as they drifted into dreams. Then she walked into the kitchen, turned on the small lamp by the coffee maker, and sat down at the table. The same table where the wedding invitation had once sat like a challenge. The corkboard was empty now, not because she had removed the invitation, but because she no longer needed it there. She no longer needed reminders of what she'd survived. She no longer needed proof that she was stronger now. She no longer needed closure from the man who had broken her. She had given herself the closure he could never provide. Emily folded her hands on the table and let silence settle around her. Not heavy, not lonely, but peaceful. Her life wasn't glamorous. It wasn't flashy, but it was hers. And that, she realized, was worth more than any validation, any status symbol, any misguided performance an ex-husband could stage. Tomorrow would be ordinary. Work, school, chores, dinner. But tomorrow would also be hers. And this time, she would step into it without the weight of the past shadowing her every breath. Closure wasn't a conversation. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a moment someone else granted. Closure was the quiet understanding that the past no longer had permission to define you. And Emily Carter, once broken, once doubted, once underestimated, was finally, beautifully, wholeheartedly free.